Jesus gave his life a ransom yonder on Calvary, on Mount Calvary, cruel Calvary, paved the way by blood that we might wear a bright shining crown. Praise his holy name. Salvation has been brought down. Praise the Lord. Salvation has been brought down. Go and shout and tell the world around. Tell today, preach the word of God that we might win a crown. Tell the lost, salvation is full and free. Spread the news all over the land and sea. Tell it afar, tell it afar. Praise the Lord, salvation has been brought down. All alone without a friend, he sought to pay
got your song books, let's turn to 421. Try to sing all three verses of this. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, from the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. All my heart to him I give, ever to him I'll cling. In his blessed presence live, ever his praises sing. Love so mighty and so true merits my soul's best songs. Faithful, loving service to him belongs. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Sorry about being a little late. So we're in Micah chapter 6. We finished verse 8 last week. So we'll be in verse 9. Verse 9, he starts another section now where he is going to talk about the punishment that the people are going to receive. Yeah. Somebody say something. Oh, sorry. I thought somebody said something. About the punishment that people are going to receive. So it says, the Lord's voice cries to the city, wisdom shall see your name. And then it says, hear the rod who has appointed it. The last line there, I'm not really sure what that means. There's a lot of different translations for that, and most scholars aren't really sure what the latter part of the line means there. But the city here is talking about Jerusalem. And so it's saying that God's voice is going to cry out against the city. And it says, the ESV says the second line that it is sound wisdom to fear your name. So the idea is that the city is going to call out to God, and God is telling them that, it would be wise of you to fear me, basically. So going on to verse 10, it says, and there yet the treasures of wickedness in the house of the wicked, and the short measure that is an abomination, shall I count pure those with the wicked scales and the bag of deceitful weights. For her rich men are full of violence, her inhabitants have spoken lies, and the tongue is deceitful in their mouth. And so what these three verses are about, it goes back to the idea that he talked about earlier in the book, where God is very upset with the people, particularly the wealthy people, because they're taking advantage of the poor people. And so he's talking about dishonest business practices that they were performing, where they would use false weights to cheat people out of money and so forth. So he's talking about, again, how God is upset with, he's mentioned 3 different groups off and on in the book, and he's going to do that again in this chapter and the next chapter. But this particular group he's hitting on here are the wealthy people that are taking advantage of the poor people. So verse 13, it says, "Therefore I will also make you sick by striking you." I think the ESV says something a little different. Yeah, it's similar. Okay, so God is saying that he's going to strike them by making you desolate because of your sins. The idea is because of their sins, God is going to be the source of their punishment. And then as you move on, verse 14, he's going to mention what these are called futility curses, and he's going to do 5 consecutive futility curses where he says you're going to try to have something and then it's not going to work, basically. So that's why they're called futility curses. So the first one is verse 13. It says, "Therefore I will also," verse 14, "you shall eat but not be satisfied. Hunger shall be in your midst." So what he's predicting here is that a famine is going to strike the city, which that did happen. So that's the first one. A famine is going to come. The second one, it says, "You may carry some away, but shall not save them. And what you do rescue, I will give to the sword." So that one is, the idea is that the wealthy people are trying to accumulate a lot more wealth and so forth by their greed and by oppressing the poor. And he says you may acquire some stuff as a result of that, but what's going to happen to all your stuff? Well, all your stuff is just going to go to Assyria. So when the Assyrians come in and take over the country, everything that you've acquired by your ill-gotten means is going to just be lost. It's going to be futile. So the first futility curse is you'll be hungry due to famine. The second futility curse, you'll lose all your stuff. Verse 15, it says you shall sow but not reap. And so that one is, the last 3 futility curses all have to do with harvest. So this one is for grain. So they'll sow the grain, but they won't reap it. And again, that's because the Assyrians will come in and take over everything. The second one, you shall tread the olives, but not anoint yourself with oil. So again, the idea is that they would not harvest the olives because Assyria will come in. And then the last one, and it says make sweet wine, but not drink it. The ESV is a little different, but the idea is the same. They might plant the grapes, but they wouldn't harvest the grapes. And so with all 5 of these ideas, the idea is all these things that you're trying to reap or accumulate or whatever for wealth, you're going to lose it all to Assyria when Assyria comes in. And so why is that the case? Why is all this going to come upon Judah in the near future? And he's going to go back to the reason for it again here in verse 16. He says, "For the statutes of Omri are kept, all the works of Ahab's house are done." And so if you don't remember off the top of your head who Omri and Ahab are, Omri is, these are both kings of Israel, not Judah. And the point he's trying to make is Judah has become just as wicked as Israel has or was. And that's why God's going to punish them. So who is Omri? Omri, he was an usurper, so he killed the king and then took over the throne. He was one of the more well-known kings of Israel, and he started a dynasty of multiple successive generations after him that became king. But in the ancient Near East, he was sort of famous as the king of Israel. So Assyria would often refer to Israel in their writings as the land of Omri. So they'd call it that instead of calling it Israel. So he was pretty well known in the Middle East at the time. So Omri, but what he's known for in the Bible is reintroducing Baal worship to Israel, okay? And that's what God is alluding to here, so through Micah. So Omri is notorious for his Baal worship, okay? Now, is he attested outside of the Bible just for kicks and giggles? Yes. He's mentioned on the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. Shalmaneser III is an Assyrian king, so there's Assyrian documentation of Omri. I think that's in the British Museum. And then he's also mentioned on the Moabite stone. So if you remember, Moab is another country adjacent to Israel and Judah. So those two countries both mention Omri on their some different artifacts. So then if you move on to Ahab, who's Ahab? Ahab is Omri's son who became king after him, maybe better known for his spouse, who is Jezebel. Good. For bonus points, where is Jezebel from? She is a princess from Sidon. Okay, so Tyre and Sidon are Phoenician cities. So Jezebel is a Phoenician princess that married Ahab. What you probably wouldn't know off the top of your head what her name actually means. But if you notice, what does the end of her name sound like? So the end of her name has Baal in it. Just trying to look for something real quick. Yeah, so her name actually may be corrupted in the Hebrew text to mock her or prevent from saying her actual name. But so what her name actually means is a little hard to decipher, but it may mean Baal is my husband, or it could mean Baal is exalted. Okay, so that's what her name means. And then, does anybody remember her father's name from the Bible? Ethbaal. Good, Steve. Does anybody know what Ethbaal means? Okay, Ethbaal means with Baal. Okay, so you can see that she came from a long line of Baal worshipers. So Omri, who was a Baal worshiper and let Baal worship happen in Israel, allowed his son to marry a princess who worshiped Baal in Phoenicia. So what do you think is going to happen when Ahab brings Jezebel to town? They're just going to keep worshiping Baal. Okay, so that gives you a little background and perspective of who Jezebel was and why Israel kind of really went off the rails during Omri and Ahab's time. So what is God really hitting at here? Well, Judah has become just as bad as Israel, and particularly just as bad as the times of Omri and Ahab, which is kind of some of their worst times in Israel. Okay, so it says, for the statutes of Omri are kept, and all the works of Ahab's house are done, and you walk in their counsel. In other words, you're just like them. Then I may make you a desolation, and your inhabitants a hissing. Therefore you shall bear the reproach of my people. In other words, God is going to make the city of Jerusalem a desolation, and people are going to mock you. Okay, so when Assyria comes in, people are going to mock and laugh. Now, Assyria is not the ones who eventually take them into captivity. That's going to be Babylon later. But when Babylon does come in and take them into captivity, did anybody mock and laugh at them that the Bible records? Do you remember? All right, so Ammon, I think it's Ammon, maybe Moab, but I think it's Ammon. One of those two. They mock them, okay, and they laugh, and they actually help Babylon capture Jerusalem and take it over. So all these things come true over time. Jerusalem and Judah do go into captivity, and other countries mock them and laugh at them when it happens, okay? All right, so that's the end of chapter 6. Does anybody have any questions on chapter 6? Okay. Yeah.
Interesting contrast, exactly the opposite of what Moses told in Deuteronomy. You're going into the promised land, you're going to live
That's true. Yeah, so if you didn't hear Steve's saying that, and it's a good point. So when Moses was telling about the promised land, and when Joshua talked about it too, they said you're going to go into the promised land and you're going to take over basically the wealth that is already there. So if you'll kind of go back and look at Joshua, when they went in, they only destroyed a couple of cities when they went in. Most of the cities, they would just take them over, and then they would live there. So the city was already built. They didn't have to do anything. There were already houses there. They could just kind of move in, ready-made. And then the land was very fertile, and they could, plant crops and so forth. So they kind of went into a country that was ready for them to occupy it. But as Steve said, now the opposite is happening. Everything they've accumulated is just going to fall to the Assyrians because of their sin, okay? And then later the Babylonians after that. Okay, chapter 7 is going to start off a little negative, but then it's going to swing to a positive at the end here. So it starts off with woe is me. And the me here is not entirely certain. It could be Micah talking, but it's probably Jerusalem, so it's a personification of the city. So most of this, the person talking that you'll see in chapter 7 is most of the time it's probably the city of Jerusalem itself. Okay, so it says, "For I am like those who gather summer fruits, like those who glean vintage grapes. There is no cluster to eat of the first ripe fruit which my soul desires." So what is he talking about? He's basically saying that he's hungry, but there's nothing to eat, right? So there's a famine that has come into the land. Even after you would glean the crops, they would leave a little bit for poor people to come in and eat off of and so forth. And he's saying there's nothing here. There's nothing left to eat. So then it says, verse 2, it says, "The faithful man has perished from the earth." In other words, everybody that's left in Jerusalem at this point is not a good person, basically. The situation has become so bad in Jerusalem that everybody is wicked. And then it goes on to say, "And there is no one upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. Every man hunts his brother with a net." So the Judeans had gotten so bad that they had turned on each other. You couldn't trust each other anymore. And then he's going to continue this same thought in the next verse or two. So in verse 3 says, "That they may successfully do evil with their hands." That's what they think about all the time. And they had become quite good at it, apparently. It says, "The prince asks for gifts, the judge seeks a bribe, and the great man utters his evil desire." And these are the three groups he's hit on in the past. So the royal house or the ruling class. Prince doesn't necessarily mean a royal prince. It can mean a high official or whatever. So the administration is evil, the judges are evil, and then the great men, which would be the wealthy men and the influential people, they're also evil. So those three groups, he's hit on them multiple times throughout the book. And he's just saying that all of them are evil. They're only interested in money. They're only interested in personal gain. They don't really care about justice or about doing the right thing for other people. They only care about themselves. So then he goes on to say, they scheme together. And then verse 4, "The best of them is like a briar, and the most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge." So when you read other places in the Bible, what is the only thing that a briar and a hedge is good for? To be thrown into the fire. Okay, that's what it's good for. So he's basically saying that all these, quote, people that are important by human standards in the city of Jerusalem, they're all worthless people at this point, okay? They all, figuratively speaking, are just ready to be thrown into the fire. And I guess sort of literally, if you want to kind of look at it that way, that's where they're headed, is towards hell. And so he's saying that that's all they're good for at this point, from a spiritual standpoint. Then he says, "The day of your watchman and your punishment comes." In other words, the watchman for the city is watching, and he is going to eventually see Assyria coming towards them to take them. And it says, "Now shall be their perplexity." I think the ESV says something else here. Now their confusion is at hand. So what he's saying is your punishment is going to come. You can't mock God forever. You can't go on doing whatever you want to do and ignoring God's will. So your punishment is going to come. When it comes, the watchman will see it, and then chaos will ensue once it happens. Verse 5 and 6, again, he's going to talk about how the social structure of Jerusalem had fallen apart, how they couldn't trust each other anymore. So verse 5, it says, "Do not trust a friend. Do not put your confidence in a companion." So you can't trust your friends, you can't trust your companions. And then it says, "Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your bosom." In other words, you can't even trust your spouse, okay? That's an idiom. Guard the doors of your mouth just means don't share any secrets with your spouse, because they'll turn around and use it against you, okay? So then verse 6, it says, "For son dishonors father." I think the ESV says, "For the son treats the father with contempt." And what that means is the son treats the father as if the father is a fool, okay? And then going on in verse 6, it says, "Daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." A man's enemies are the men of his own household. So a household there could be sons and daughters. It could also be servants that are in the house. So when you go back and you look at the way Israelite family dynamics was supposed to work, one of the 10 Commandments is honor your father and mother. And so they were supposed to honor their father and mother, do what their father and mother said. And father and mother had so much control over the children that they could actually sell a child into slavery if they needed to, okay? And so now this is all flipped on its head. Instead of the parents being in control and receiving honor from their kids, the kids just look at them as if they're idiots. And they don't listen to them, don't obey them. So in the law, if you struck your father or disobeyed him in some way that was significant, that was worthy of the death penalty. If you were a degenerate child, that was also worthy of the death penalty, according to the law. So that has all been flipped on its head, and nobody's obeying any of this anymore. Everybody just does whatever they want. Verse 7, it says, "Therefore I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me." And this might be Micah talking here and not Jerusalem. But it could be Jerusalem saying, I'm looking to the future. Once God cleans house and you get all these horrible people outside of my city, then maybe there'll be hope for the future after maybe some better people are occupying the city. Anyway, the first 7 verses are fairly bleak. But now is where it's going to start sliding into a bit more hope for the future. Okay. All right, so verse 8, it says, "Do not rejoice over me, my enemy. When I fall, I will arise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me." And so what he's saying is, he's telling the enemies, don't mock me, don't rejoice over my situation, because God is going to raise me back up. Okay, so I'm going to be down for a short period of time, and then God is going to restore me in the future. So it's better not to mock me, because then you'll have to eat your words later. All right, verse 9, it says, "I will bear the indignation of the Lord." So this is kind of one of the first times in the book where, other than Micah, the city or the people recognize their own guilt. Okay, so this is the city speaking. So this is like Jerusalem, as if Jerusalem could talk. And Jerusalem is saying, yes, there's sin in the land, there's sin in the city. I will bear the guilt of the city, and I will accept whatever punishment God is going to give me. So verse 9 says, "I will bear the indignation of the Lord." In other words, I admit wrong has happened. I will accept my punishment. It says, "Because I have sinned against him, until he pleads my case and executes justice for me." In other words, I acknowledge guilt. I'm going to accept my punishment. There will be a window of time where I will be punished, which is what lines 3 and 4 mean. And then it says, "He will bring me forth to the light. I will see his righteousness." So after the time of punishment is over, then God will start to renew and right the situation and fix the situation. So Jerusalem is saying, okay, I've done wrong. I deserve to be punished. I will be punished for a window of time. But after that time is over, then things will start to go well again, okay? So this is kind of now looking to the future for when God will rectify the situation. So verse 10, it says, "Then she who is my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who said to me, 'Where is the Lord your God?'" So the expression, "Where is the Lord your God?" that's kind of a famous saying Assyria would do. So when Assyria would come in and take over a country, they would mock them. And they would particularly mock the God of that country, okay? Because they would basically make the argument that if your God was a real God or your God was very powerful, then your God would not allow you to be taken by Assyria, okay? So if Assyria could take you, that means Assyria and Assyria's God is stronger than you and your God. And it's usual bully mentality, right? So the bully comes in, defeats the other little kid, and then they mock them while they do it, okay? So that's kind of what's going on here. But Jerusalem is saying, you don't want to do that in this situation. You don't want to mock me. Why? Line 4 of verse 10. "My eyes will see her, now she will be trampled down like mud in the streets." So what will happen is the ones that mock will end up getting defeated in the end, okay? So they will be the ones that will be trampled down in the street. So he's saying to Assyria, don't mock me, because I guess in our language, what comes around goes around, okay? So he's basically warning them that you're going to get this eventually too. So verse 11, it says, "In the day when your walls are to be built, in that day the decree shall go far and wide." And he's talking about when the walls of Jerusalem get rebuilt, okay? So this is in the time of Nehemiah at this point. But he's talking about a future event when people, the remnant comes back, they start to rebuild the city, rebuild the walls. It says in verse 12, "In that day they shall come to you from Assyria and the fortified cities, from the fortress to the river, from sea to sea and mountain to mountain." And what he's talking about is the remnant will come back to Jerusalem from the places they were taken into captivity and the places they fled to. So they're going to come back from Assyria. Now, some of them went to Assyria, but really they went to Babylon, but it's the same thing in this case, okay? So the ones in Babylon will come back. The ones that fled to Egypt, and I don't think the New King James actually uses the word Egypt here, but the ESV does. So those that went to Assyria and Babylon will come back. Those that went to Egypt will come back. And they will now establish a new place that goes from, New King James says, fortress to river, sea to sea. Let me see what the ESV says, because, yeah, the ESV says from Egypt to river. That probably makes more sense. And then from sea to sea. So what is he talking about? When you say from Egypt to the river, so the boundary between, and it's still there today, the boundary between Palestine and Egypt, which you probably hear about in the news right now a lot, there is a river there, okay? And that was the boundary between Israel and Egypt when Israel was at its largest size under Solomon, okay? It's called the Wadi something or another. I forget the exact name. But anyway, you can find it on a map. So that's what he's talking about. So they're predicting that the country will be back to the grandeur that it had during the time of Solomon. So it'll go from basically the border of Egypt to the river, and the river here is the Euphrates River, okay? You may hear some certain groups of people right now that will say a similar chant song about eliminating a certain group of individuals in that particular area, and they will say from the river to the sea. If you've ever watched the news in the last month, you may have heard this expression. It's the same area, all right? I'm not going to elaborate further on that one. But anyway, so the idea is that the hope is that the country will basically go back to the grandeur during the time of Solomon, okay? All right, verse 13, it says, "Yet the land shall be desolate because of those who dwell in it and the fruit of their deeds." And so what he's talking about here is the lands that they left, okay? So the Jews that were in Assyria will leave Assyria or Babylon. The Jews that were in Egypt will leave Egypt. So what will then become of Egypt and Babylon when there are no more Jews in it? It will be desolate, okay? Why? Because God's people won't be there anymore, okay? So when the people leave those countries and go back to Jerusalem, then those countries will be void of any godly people, okay? So they will become desolate. All right, I was kind of hoping to finish this tonight, but probably we won't. But we'll see what happens here. All right, so verse 14, it says, this is a call for God to be a shepherd for the people. It says, "Shepherd your people with your staff." And this is as opposed to Assyria with the sword that was talked about in chapter 5. So instead of a God with a sword punishing the people, they're crying out for God to be a shepherd with a staff to shepherd the people, okay? So it says, "The flock of your heritage who dwell solitarily in a woodland in the midst of Carmel, let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old." And so what he's saying, when he's talking about them being in solidarity in a woodland, he's saying that the remnant will all return. So not all the Jews will return, but the remnant will return. And that's really what all this is about, is the remnant, okay? The faithful Jews. So the remnant will return, and they will dwell within Israel again. So they will be called out of these other countries and just dwell in Israel. And then he mentions Carmel, Bashan, and Gilead, which are three areas. And Bashan and Gilead are in the northeast. Carmel is slightly northwest. Anyway, they're all different areas that were kind of lush for different reasons. And so he's just reminding them of basically the good old days type situation. Things will go back to being great like they were before, particularly in the time of Solomon and David, which is what he means when he says, as in the days of old, okay? So we're going to get the old gang back together, go back home, and everything will be great like it used to be in the time of David and Solomon, is kind of the idea. All right, so verse 15, it says, "As in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will show them wonders." So God brought them out of Egypt when they were slaves. And that was a miracle for God to do that, okay? What God will now have to do to bring them out of captivity again from Babylon and these other countries will also require a miracle, okay? And so that's what he's saying when he says, "I will show them wonders," okay? So for them to be able to come home from that situation will require God to intervene in the situation, okay? All right, so verse 16, it says, "The nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might. They shall put their hand over their mouth, their ears shall be deaf." In other words, the nations will be astonished when this happens, okay? That's what the expressions of the hand over their mouth and the hands over their ears, that's a sign of astonishment, okay? So the nations will know. So when God brought the people out of Egypt, all of the other countries knew this, okay? And it was shocking to all the countries that Egypt could lose all these people that were slaves with no, I mean, just let them go. And so everybody knew that happened. And everybody assumed Egypt was really weak after that happened, and some countries tried to take advantage of that situation. And so now the same thing is going to happen. Everybody's going to know that Persia, which is eventually who's going to let them come back, okay? Now, Persia did it of their own accord. It wasn't the same situation as them leaving Egypt, but the idea is the same, that God will intervene and cause Persia to let them go back, and the other countries will see this happen and know that it happens, okay? So verse 17, "They shall lick the dust like a serpent, they shall crawl from their holes like snakes of the earth, they shall be afraid of the Lord our God, and shall fear because of you." In other words, the imagery is of your enemies will become when it says they're like a serpent and they crawl on the ground, it means they're bowing down, okay? So in the ancient Near East, if you're the defeated party, then you are humiliated. And when you're humiliated, you bow down on the ground before the person that has defeated you, okay? And so that's what it's saying. So the idea is all of Israel's enemies will be humiliated in the process, okay? So as we kind of think about that for our own time, we see our various enemies, and I don't mean enemies in terms of countries, but enemies in terms of people who war against God and against God's word and God's people, different groups within our country that try to silence the word and God's people and so forth. Well, what will come of those groups and people over time? They always get defeated, okay? Now, evil will change its face, okay? It might not be the same group tomorrow as it is today, but they all get defeated in time, okay? And that's what always happens. So who was the big dog on the block at this time? Assyria. Does Assyria still exist? No. Who was the next one in line? Babylon. Do they still exist? No. Who was the next one in line after that? The Medes and Persians. Do they still exist? No. Who was the next one after that? Greece. Do they still exist? Yes, but not like they used to. And the next one after that was Rome. Do they still exist? Yes, but nothing like they once were, okay? Our country's a big deal right now. Will they be a big deal in 200 years? I don't know. So we need to kind of keep this in mind from God's people's perspective, that there will always be evil. It will always be defeated. It will always fall flat on its face, okay? But we'll stop there for tonight. We'll finish this up next week and then start into probably Nahum after that. Does anybody have any questions? All right, good to see everybody.